2020 workshop training for the 2020 project for the summer workshop. Just real quickly, I want to kind of gauge, because this program actually isn't that new, but obviously some modifications have been made to the program to move it into the workshop. One of the big things, obviously, is students during the intensive periods don't participate online. So a lot of the components that students did during the regular term, online components, we've moved to offline and made some structure and revisions and changed the syllabi around slightly. So I want to get an idea here of who is familiar with this program. So who is teaching this program now, currently? Patrick? Anyone else? Did anyone teach it during the spring term? Patrick? Okay. So I'll rely on you a lot. You can just run this for us. So everyone's here is new to the program. What have you heard about this program?
As long as they're prepared, it's fine.
Yeah. Why?
Because if they're not prepared, they don't have anything to do in the first hour.
Right. What do they do in this class versus CL? That's one of the major differences. What's that?
Presentation.
Presentation?
PowerPoint.
Yeah, they can do PowerPoint, they can do a lot of different things. We'll touch on that as well. But let's think about the content of the class itself. In the CL classes, what kind of content do we have for students to actually use? Anyone? EC. What do we use in the English Chip program? Yeah, stories, right? Stories, and we have the workbook, right? How about Emmy? Same thing. Remember English, stories, workbook. When you get to bridge and above, what do we use? Yeah, essays, expository essays. That's all academic, right? Very different. 2020 project uses what? Stories, but a little bit different. Is it the same kind of stories as EC and ME? Yeah, it's novels. It's full-on novels in a second language, right? Who here knows what level they're actually going to be teaching? Okay, so about half the people know what level. Who's level 1? Anyone? Level 1. Okay, do you know what levels? What CL levels are in the level 1? Yeah, Mega Giga, right? Mega Giga students reading full-on novels in the second language. Level 2. Who's level 2? Okay, so that's Terra Bridge, right? Level 3. Okay, or Birdie. Level 4. Level 4 is Eagle. So we got, it's just one level in level 4, Eagle. Now, in your location, they may put in some others, depending, class density becomes an issue when it's only one level. And level 5, level 5, okay, that's Alpha Plus. Okay, so which levels do you guys think would be the most problematic?
1 and 2.
Right, 1 and 2. Right, we're talking about very low proficiency students reading novels in a second language. Who here is bilingual? Okay, we've got a handful, right? Those of you who are bilingual, can you raise your hands again? Okay, how many of you have actually read a novel in your second or third language? Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, not that many, right? I'll tell you myself, I'm not bilingual. I don't speak Korean, I don't speak Spanish, I don't speak any other language except English. I can only imagine how daunting it must be for someone to actually attempt to read, especially students at that low level, attempt to read a novel in English, right? So what do you think one of our most important duties as an instructor is going to be in the classroom? All right, keeping them interested. What else? Yeah, hopefully motivating them, encouraging them, right? Okay, so let's get into the actual more specifics of the program. We'll get into more of the student management things as well, but that will be an important part of actually this program being successful and you enjoying it as well as your students. Okay, so the program objectives. Let's just go over these real quickly. There's 3 of them, right? Exposure, education, experience, right? So there are these 7 global talent indicators. Now these were actually developed in conjunction with Seoul National University. So I'm actually partnered with Seoul National University, and they had like a team coming up with these. And there's an actual test that students can take that assesses their global talent indicators, these 7 criteria, like where they stand, what the national average is, and things like that. All right, it's basically a personality assessment test. Now, it's maybe a little hard to see from the back. I'll just run through real quickly. We've got vision, creativity, global citizenship, interpersonal competency, cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, and self-leadership. Okay? Are any of these terms new to anyone here? Are there any of these that you're not really sure exactly what it means or what it is? Nothing? Good. Okay, because, I mean, that's the conclusion we came to as well. These 7 things are not new. We all know what they are. The students may not be familiar with some of them, but the idea they're familiar with, right? So let's go back up to the objectives. So we've got identify, apply, and strengthen the 7 GTIs. So what we're actually going to do is, through the novels, look for examples of these GTI, discuss them, have students do projects based on them, things like that, depending on what is happening in that particular scene from the novel, right? Education, develop appreciation for literature. This is a novel-based class. If they don't enjoy reading, it's going to be very, very difficult to get them to read the books or participate in class and learn and do all the things that we're trying to do in this program. Experience. Communicate through presentations and group projects. They will be doing presentations. Now, this is where it slightly differs from the regular term. Presentations will not be done every class. And we'll get into that in the next slide as well. But they will do group projects every class. So I guess kind of doing presentations, but not the same as before. There's 2 different kinds of presentations that take place in this program. We'll talk about both of those. So of these 3 objectives, which one do you guys feel would be the most difficult for you to accomplish in the classroom?
Interpersonal competency.
No, I'm sorry, of the 3 objectives.
I think that's student development, appreciation, the literature.
Exactly. That's the most difficult one, right? How many people here are avid readers? Okay, now keep your hands up, please. How many people here were avid readers in middle school, elementary school? Yeah, see the hands going down. I'll tell you myself, my hands will be down for all those questions. Right? I do enjoy reading now, but I didn't, obviously, I didn't when I was a student. I didn't really start enjoying reading until I was probably in my mid-20s. And I picked up, there was one particular book that kind of got me started on reading. But that's the thing. We're trying to take students, and the majority of them are extremely busy. Right? The last thing they want to do is to sit there, look at these, 30 pages in a foreign language and try and decipher what's happening. Right? Not only that, enjoy it. But that's what we're trying to do, is make it enjoyable for them. So what methods might you take in the classroom in order to motivate your students to actually want to read? I mean, there's no wrong answer here. But let's just say you're thrown in the classroom right now, the program training stops, and you've got a class full of kids who've got this 200, 250, up to like 400 page novel in front of them, and your job is to motivate them to read this novel. What kind of strategies might you use or incorporate?
Try to
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know, try to relate the story to them maybe.
Right. Relevancy is huge, right? And that's one of the things we'll get in novel selection as well. The relevancy for these students is going to be very, very important. Jason, what would you do?
How would you change the story? Like events that happened in this point, but have it match into the rest of the book.
Right. Give them a little more creativity, a little more autonomy over what we're discussing, right? It doesn't have to be static and fixed. Well, this is what happened, this is all we're going to talk about, right? Give them a little more freedom in the classroom. So let's just think about these books. This is the books for each level. These are the 5 levels, Mega, Giga, and on up, right, starting from the bottom. So they're going to cover 2 books in the course of 13 classes. Actually, technically really 12 classes, because the 13th class is more of a workshop kind of class. You're not really focused on the novels themselves. There were 2 ways that these books were selected. This isn't just one person's preference, right? It's not just whoever developed the program was like, ooh, I like this book, right? And then they just threw it in the program, right? It had to be a little more rigid than that. So 2 of the things were Lexile score, which Lexile is a system for measuring the difficulty of language. In most novels, you can actually input the name of the novel and just Lexile, and it'll give you a score. And we equated that to the Cheongdam content score. So we tried to make sure the content matches the Cheongdam content difficulty, right? Now again, this is slightly different because they are novels. Difficulty may be a little bit higher because not only are they novels, they're Western novels. So it's a lot more colloquial language, right, that the students may be less familiar with, right? It's a lot harder to use those reading skills to decipher exactly what words or phrases might mean, right? And another thing was critical acclaim, right? Every single one of these books has won some sort of award. Majority of them are Newbery Award winners or Newbery Award honorees, right? Well, I can't remember for this one. Like this one, I think is the National Book Award honoree, the underneath, to the high level. Some of them have one more higher level because the difficulty of these is much higher. But the majority of them are Newbery Award winners. Oh, quickly. Anyone know what the names of the levels comes from? Oh, sorry, the 2020 levels. Fidelity, wisdom, piety, righteousness, benevolence.
Chinese characters.
Yeah, Chinese characters for what? Confucianism. Right. It's the 5 principles of Confucianism. Right. This was actually very intentionally chosen by the CEO himself to use these 5. Anyone know why?
Everyone loves Gongcha.
That could be one possible reason. But there's something very different about these 5 than your regular level names. Mega, Giga, Terra, Bridge, Par, Birdie. There's something built into these level names that's not built into these level names.
There's no hierarchy.
Right. No hierarchy whatsoever. Right? Why do you think the CEO wanted no hierarchy within the level names?
So students in the programs don't feel as though, like if they're, say, at wisdom, that somebody at righteousness is better than they are.
Right. Exactly. Because this program has absolutely nothing to do with where you are relative to others. Right? A student in fidelity should get the same benefit as a student in benevolence. The only difference is they're just working with different content because of their proficiency level. Right? But this program is not about leveling up or your achievement test scores or anything like that. Right? Obviously, from our objectives, we go back to that, right? Developing an appreciation for literature, identifying and strengthening these GTI traits, doing presentations and group work. None of that is level specific, right? Just because you level up doesn't mean you're going to be more proficient at any of those objectives. Okay, so this is a very simplified program flow. So in class, I actually do theme-like connection at the beginning of class. There's also a GTI checkup. We actually just call this whole section connection. It's pretty simple. Students, for this particular track, students, they'll have pictures in their workbooks, and then you'll have, in your teacher's guide, you'll have like discussion questions, right? And those pictures and discussion questions are all related to the GTI trait that you're going to talk about for that day, right? Each lesson is focused on one specific trait or subcomponent of that trait, right? And then you go to theme-like connection where you try to segue into the students' own lives, right? Where you ask them more hypothetical questions or they give examples of when they encountered this type of experience and what did they do or how did they feel, things like that. And the next thing is close reading. close reading actually has a few different parts to it, right? So one thing we do have to be aware of, because it's a novel class, it is going to be homework dependent, meaning the students do have to read in order to participate in certain parts of the class, right? But for the close reading, there's really only one part the students need to have read. There's story review, story analysis, and story appreciation. Which of those three do you think students need to have read to participate? Story review, story appreciation, story analysis. Analysis could help review, right? If they haven't read, then the review is going to be painful, right? Because then you kind of have to just spoon feed them what actually did happen in the required homework reading pages. Okay, but the other two components, story analysis and story appreciation, students don't need to have read in order to complete those components. And actually that goes for all the remaining components of class as well. It's not fully contingent on the students having read the assigned homework reading to complete that component. So let's just kind of talk about those for a second. So story analysis is where students actually learn about a specific literary device, and then they see examples of it from the actual novel they read, whether it's like alliteration or foreshadowing or something like that. So, and then they complete a small exercise, like matching, oh, this symbolism, this little guy means this. They like, connect the dots or whatever. And then there's story appreciation, where they do close reading. There's a few small excerpts from the novel that are related to that GTI trait or theme from the day, and then you just discuss them, right? They kind of read it together as a class, and then you discuss how that's related, right? And then you get into more of what Jason referred to earlier of kind of let the students take over, right? They get to be like, oh, how would you feel in that situation? Or how do you think this character felt when this happened, right? Okay, any questions about the close reading section? Okay, so let's move on. Next is the Global Talent Project. Does that sound familiar to anyone? GTP. CTP, right? But it's slightly different. GNC. Okay? But it is different than CTP. We think this is kind of like a refined version of the CTP. And we'll talk about some of the differences here. But the Global Talent Project does follow the same kind of format, right? You give students information that's based on the theme for the day. They get together in groups, they work on it, they present at the end. I mean, in a nutshell, it is the same as CTP, but there's a lot of nuances that make it very different as well. Next is guided learning. Now, this is something that didn't exist previously in the regular term classes, right? This is something that we added in during the workshop. And it's just guided reading. Why do you think we added guided reading in class to the workshop?
So that you can start the reading.
Right. Not just that, but how often do your classes meet?
3 times a week.
3 times a week. Depending on the level, these students are going to have to read between 15 to 60 pages every 2 days. Yeah. I see it, right? They're like, no, it's not going to happen. Right? So what we did was, previously there was actually another component at the beginning called multisensory presentation, and that was roughly about 30 minutes of the class, right? We've actually taken that out and relocated to class 13 and added in, so everything else got bumped up by 30 minutes, added in guided reading for the last 30 minutes of class. Now, what it states in the program guide is, you should cover roughly 5 to 10 pages with your students together, right? Now that's twofold in purpose, why we want to cover 5 to 10 pages. Right? The first thing is homework burden. If students are supposed to read, say, 30 pages, that's roughly the average of the program, 30 pages, and you can cover 10 of those in class. I mean, we've significantly reduced how much they're responsible for once they go home, right? Because they don't have much time, they only have 2 days, right? What do you think the other reason might be?
Look their interest.
Right, pique their interest, right? Because you're there to help them get through those 5 to 10 pages. Whereas if we just send them off on their own and say, read these 30 pages, right? They may open it up, look at that first page and be like, I don't understand any of this, and then close it. They're done, right? But if we can find something in those 5 to 10 pages to pique the student's interest, they're a lot more likely to say, you know what, I only have 15 more pages, sure, why not? I want to find out what happens next anyways, right? So the guided reading is something that's new for the workshop, and hopefully it will help alleviate some of that reading burden that students are going to face. Luckily with this track, the books aren't quite as bad in terms of the amount students have to read. For the other track of 2020, they're at the high levels, there's some pretty dense books. Has anyone here read Life of Pi? Yeah, so Life of Pi is actually in level 5 for the other track, right? Life of Pi is a pretty, I mean, it's a fairly substantial novel, right? I believe it's over 400 pages, and that's a little difficult. Most of these books, I think, even at the high level, don't really surpass 300, and if they do, it's just by a little, not by too much, right? Okay, so another thing that we implemented to try and make sure that students have completed their homework reading, right, is we did give them comprehension check questions. Now this was something that students did online previously, but it's been made into an offline handout that you'll hand out at the end of class, right? It's pretty simple and straightforward in nature. 10 multiple choice questions that are evenly distributed throughout the homework reading pages, and it just kind of makes sure that when students come to class, if they've completed this, they at least have the most basic, most fundamental understanding of what happened in those pages, right? So even worse, not necessarily worst case scenario, but even your kind of mediocre students who won't have like thoroughly read it, hopefully they'll at least skim and scan to make sure they completed their comprehension check questions. So they know, oh, you know, this person went here, you know, he found this, right? And those are the most basic plot points from the reading, okay? There's another thing that we implemented. It's an additional homework handout. We're going to start adding this to the regular track as well. But before we kind of talk about the colloquial language, we've actually met with a lot of 2020 instructors and tried to collect feedback about the program. The colloquial language has been one of the biggest obstacles instructors have found that students face. Especially with the first track, there were some novels that were very slang heavy. Had a lot of idiomatic expressions and things like that students just, everything just went over their head. It's like, I don't really understand I read it all, I don't understand what happened in the story, right? So what we added is expressions handouts. We actually had current or past 2020 instructors go through the books that they taught, pull out expressions that their students struggled with, put it into a handout, and then we had another team actually translate it into Korean, right? So it's given like the expression itself, the Korean translation, and then the context from the novel, the actual sentence it's in from the novel, right? So hopefully that gives your students a little more guidance as they're going through as well, right? So that's just an extra handout that you give out to students, but please do encourage your students to use it because it really will help them comprehend all that idiomatic language that they're going to encounter in these novels. Yes?
The handouts will be book specific, or are they like general?
No, they're very book specific, book and lesson specific. Like each handout applies to exactly those pages, right? I can't remember. It may have the page number on it for each expression, but it may not. I can't exactly remember off the top of my head. But anyways, it does have the actual sentence from the story as well. Okay, so let's talk about some different issues we're going to face. Everyone has at least a general idea of the program right now. So let's talk about issues you'll face. So you've got your uninterested student, your withdrawn student, students that didn't take the GTI test, which that's a very branch-specific thing. If your location chooses to, they can contact, I believe it's the marketing team, and students can actually take that GTI assessment test and get the results, and then they can share those results with you, so you kind of have an idea on where your students are strong and are weak and things like that, so you can kind of utilize them in the classroom. But I would be hesitant to talk about weak points, you obviously don't want to be like, oh, by the way, I remember you're not very creative. She doesn't know anything about creativity. He's a terrible global citizen, right? You don't want to really highlight their weaknesses, but you do want to maybe point out their strengths, or maybe you can indirectly focus on certain students for certain lessons, right? Depending on what their scores are. But that is very brand specific. Yes?
I also noticed on the GTI they have like a job recommendation thing, and the kids really like that because it's totally something they never even thought of. So
Oh, really?
I kind of explained to them maybe what they could do to do the job they want, like if they want to be the CEO. Right? So what leadership things they would have to have instead of being a weatherman, like one of those.
So when did you actually get your results?
I think it takes a month after they take the test, but the PDF uploads like after a week and a half, I think. And you can get that from ERP.
So that would be definitely something I would talk to your FM or HI about. Or if you are at FM or HI, I would talk with your branch manager or a staff member, or if your location is doing it. I know some locations actually pay for students to take the test because it does cost money. But some locations just made it optional for the students, or for the parents actually, rather. So if they choose to take this test, they can. So you may have some students who have, some students who haven't, like that. Did all your students actually take the test?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did the branch offer it for free to the students?
I'm not sure if they had to pay, but it seemed like it did.
Yeah. Okay. Did you find that useful, having that information?
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So definitely I would speak with the appropriate person about getting that information if it is available, right? Because it can help you not only understand your students, but build rapport with them as well, right? Because, the more information you know about that student, the easier it is to get to know them. Right? So let's talk about the uninterested and withdrawn students, right? What might be some tactics that you take? Again, guys, there's no wrong answers here, right? We just kind of want to share ideas because everyone has a different classroom, different location. Every situation is different. Tasers. That's one theory. Candy. That's another. What else?
Personal questions?
Yeah.
Digress.
Related to themselves.
Right.
Ask them questions.
Personal questions, make it about them. But say you've got that student, everybody's had that student who literally comes into class, their coat's zipped up to their nose, they're staring down like this. You're like, did you read? And they're like, sorry, teacher. They won't make eye contact with you, anything. How do you deal with that type of student? I mean, how do you make that student want to read 40 pages of a novel in English?
Yeah, poke 'em.
Poke them?
I'm coming from a small branch, so like all the kids see us, and always, so even if I've never talked to them before, they've seen me, I'm waving, like, I'll get down on their level, like, okay, well, I really need you to talk, and I'll have them pinky swear. And it's really important here. Like, one of my kids, I was like, well, are you gonna do it? And she was like, oh. But like a promise to them sometimes actually means something, especially if they're like elementary level.
Yeah.
Like they tend to they'll keep their promises. I'm like, okay, I want you to read this much.
Yeah.
So bargaining with them a lot of times, it's early in the morning, they're tired,
Right.
you're tired, and just read these pages the next class.
Yep.
And then try and break it up to the next page, next class, and a little more, and a little more.
One thing to keep in mind also is be realistic. Meaning, you're probably not going to have, unless you have an elementary class, right? If you have middle school students or even maybe sixth graders, you're probably not going to have all your students complete the homework reading every class. I mean, be realistic about it as well. But, and I guess with that in mind, we should still say, okay, you know, the student has completed the homework reading. What can I give this student? What can the student learn from this 3-hour class, right? Which, based on the structure, again, the story review is pretty much the only thing the students need to have completed in order to go through that component, right? So they still can get a lot from class. And maybe if they enjoy going through those other components, they might be a little bit more likely to pick up the book for next class, right? Other tactics. What about that completely just student who just doesn't care, right? They're just like, if you're like, they won't even speak, they won't do anything, you're like, why are you here? Like, I'm on maybe.
Right, Mom?
That's it. Disciplinary action, right? Consult staff. What else?
Remind them that they're wasting their parents' money.
Right.
Filial
Guilt
duty.
trip. Guilt trip definitely works on some.
Or you tell them that you're gonna let their parents know that they're wasting their money.
Yeah.
And it's not guilt anymore, that's survival.
Yeah,
My kids will laugh in my face. They're like, that's okay.
yeah. It is very different, right? There are some. I've had kids in the past who literally they're just like, it's okay. I don't really care. My parents don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Right?
They're lying.
No, there's some of
Some of them are
the
that
They're
way.
gonna rap out of them if they don't do their work.
That's
My
true.
kids-
Sometimes.
Big time.
It's okay. My kids- they don't
I
do
mean,
homework.
you have the same issue with your CL students. So what are some ways that have worked for you in the classroom?
I feel like
In terms of
patience
motivating.
helps a lot.
What's that?
Patience.
Patience.
Like you don't really just give up after a while. Like the kid's still interested, but
Right.
you still keep trying to talk to them, and you say, "Hey, how about now?" And over time, they begin to open up little by little. It depends on how much effort you want to put in, just like how much energy you want to spend on getting that kid
Yeah.
to want to actually participate in the class.
Show your class that people who volunteer receive rewards. They have to do the easiest part of the assignment.
Right.
So,
Reward those who participate.
and we'll reward those who participate and make it the class much simpler for them or more straightforward for them.
First question is the easiest, second question is harder. The last question that's left is the most difficult question. And the kid that doesn't participate has to answer that question.
Yeah, they didn't do the reading. It was just like just slow down the class. You just focus on the hardest questions with it sometimes. It depends on the student, I guess. Knowing like since we don't know our students yet, like each student has their strengths. So maybe like the person that is being quiet, we know they're pretty good at something, and maybe we can draw them out with that part of the class. But like you said before, I mean, you want to be patient with them, but not badger them too much at the beginning because then they'll get overwhelmed with your constant like, "Oh, you're going to do this work." And just baby steps.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing. In my experience, a few years back, I actually taught NW Level 4. Has anyone taught that before? Workshop Level 4 with Animal Farm and Jonathan Lucas and Sequel. I taught it to high school seniors. This is bridge level CL, right? They were new to my particular location. They were supposed to be bridge level students. But I'll tell you one thing, in the course of 13 classes, I never got one sentence out of a single student. I'm pretty sure my branch manager just placed them in bridge, even though their proficiency was significantly lower, because it was seen as kind of a negative stigma for them to be in like the memory reading the storybooks or even EC, you know what I mean? Doing like Barcelona game or Ollie's camera or something like that, you know what I mean? So these were like literally 18-year-old high school seniors, right? I had girls come to class with full-on makeup, long nails, all this kind of stuff. Like they just sit there, do their makeup, check themselves on the cell phone, all this kind of stuff. Not a single kid read the book, either book. I would be shocked if any of them even opened either of them, right? But at that point, I just had to make an adjustment and realize, okay, this isn't really working with this particular group of students, right? What can I do to get them something out of this 3 hours that they're spending here, 3 days a week in the morning, right? So then we just started doing more conversation, right? Just literally just trying to talk to them. A lot of it was more yes and no questions and those 1 and 2 word answers, but at least then they're getting something out of me trying to force every component and literally them just like sitting there, right? Like every morning they would roll in, everyone would sit down, and everyone would look straight down at their desk. Not a single student in the class would look up at me, would look at each other, because they all just kind of had that guilty feeling. They all knew they didn't read. They're like, I don't want to be here, whatever. There's a bunch of little kids running around the hallways. But at that point, you just have to find something to make it work, right? Now again, it wasn't anywhere, probably one of the worst 13 classes I've ever had, right? In terms of relative to the others. But I do feel like I did adjust to make it work as well as I could for that particular group of students, right? And that's another thing, especially because we have a lot of people here from franchises, that's another thing you will have to possibly deal with, right? Maybe they will place Birdie students in the Alba Alba Plus level because that was the only Birdie student that wanted to sign up, right? Smaller locations don't always have the luxury of opening up every level of a program. They just kind of squeeze a lot of students into one, right? So you have to kind of be aware of where the students are and adjust accordingly, right? Now, I'm not saying like just throw everything away and just talk with your students for 3 hours. I'm just saying be aware of where your students are and what they're capable of doing, and then make the necessary adjustments. Right? Okay, so some solutions. These are just kind of general overarching solutions that you could try. First one, we've already touched on that, class enjoyment, right? There's a little bit of that hopefully thrown in because like during the preview classes, class 1 and class 7, students haven't read anything because it's the first day of that novel, right? So we have something called multimedia connection, just for those classes where they watch a video that's related and kind of discuss it and stuff. So hopefully that makes it a little more entertaining to pique their interest going into the novel. And then there's also multilateral and faceted discussion. Obviously, it's much easier to conduct a classroom if I ask you a question, right? And then you give your response, and I say, oh, what do you think about it? And then the next thing you know, it just keeps going like that. Next thing you know, you're just standing there, and the kids are just having a full discussion by themselves. Right? It makes your job a lot easier as well. Right? Take their answers, bounce it off to another student. Right? Another thing, relationship development. This is going to be big. Who here has taught workshop program before? Any intensive classes? Now, how do you feel that your relationship was relative to the regular term classes? You're meeting these kids 3 times a week for 1 month solid versus meeting a kid, say, once a week for a 3-month span. What do you think might be difference in terms of, or in your experience, what is the difference in terms of the rapport that you get with those students?
A little more casual.
Right, more casual.
More personal.
More personal. You're spending more time with them, right, in a much more concentrated space. Anything else? Okay, that's basically the idea that we're going for here is that, I mean, you are kind of, from the student's perspective, they're like, oh, a lot of them are like, I'm stuck with this teacher on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 hours in the morning during my vacation, right? So it is going to be like, kind of like experiencing that difficult trial together. It's like that shared difficulty, right? Hopefully you can get a better relationship with the students because you're all in it together and so conscious, just like going through a camp or something with people, right? And hopefully can create a strong bond in a short period of time. Okay, knowledge of specific results. Again, if you get the students' results, you can use that in the classroom to help you build rapport with the students. And then a specialized approach per component. I mean, everyone here has the program guide. The program guide states a relatively general methodology for each component, right? That is not rigid by any means, right? Again, just be aware of where your students are and what may or may not work with them, right? Try different things out. Don't do the same thing every single class, right? That's one of the fun things about it is when students come to class, they know what components you're doing, but they really don't know what's going to happen in today's class because every week you put a different spin on it, right? There are certain things like, especially for lower level students, you guys all have those like ECNME elementary classes where they're just trained. They know, you know what I mean? They could literally run the class by themselves. They know how every component goes. They know, you know what I mean? Like, oh, we're going to do memorization. Clap, first time clap, second time clap, whatever, you know what I mean? They just know how to do it. Which for some of those lower level students, they enjoy that. That makes them feel comfortable, right? Because they don't really like new things because they're already a little uncomfortable dealing with English. But with the higher level students especially, that monotony really wears down on them. Because they're like, I know this. I mean, they're almost like dealing with adults. When they're that really high proficiency, they're just like, yeah, okay, I get it, right? You went here, you did this, okay, good, next, keep going, right? So change it up, right? Try to make it interesting for your students. Okay, so the first one, we're going to just kind of briefly go through this stuff. Connection. This is reflective learning. Okay, what do you think that means, reflective learning? Emerson.
Brainstorming, thinking about it together.
Right. Thinking about what? Why do we use reflective?
Your past experiences.
Exactly. Right. Bring it back on them. right? Because everything else is focused on the novel, right? It's all external. So we want to start by doing a little bit of internal analysis, right? Bring it back on them. It's all about that creating that relevancy for students. Okay? Rationale, GTI relevancy. Again, whatever your GTI for that day is, the students should not only understand it, but be able to apply it. Oh, when this happened to me, this is an example of it, right? They'll be much more interested as you go through the later components of the class. Okay, methodology, there's the two components, GTI checkup, theme line connection, we've already kind of touched on those. Very simple in execution because they're pretty much just discussion activities, right? It's just your kind of different modes of discussion. You're talking about external versus internal. Okay? Okay, so let's talk about some issues. Now these are kind of overarching as well. So you got the guessing student, right? Student who literally just guesses everything, right? How do you guys deal with that type of student in your classrooms?
Sarcasm?
Sarcasm? That definitely works. That definitely works. It's different for different personality types, but definitely I use that a lot in my classrooms. What else? What's that?
I kind of embarrassed.
Embarrass them?
Yeah, when they say, "Oh, I picked," I go, "Oh, you pick your nose, ooh," and then the whole class, erupts.
Right, right.
So they don't do that again.
Right. What else?
I make them explain why. I'm like, okay, they'll be like, A. All right, why is it A? And they're like, B.
Yeah.
Okay, why is it B? And like, all right, I used to do it like with my memory class, especially during elimination. They just yell out anything until they got it right. Okay, you have 3 chances, otherwise we keep it.
Yeah.
So find some way to get them to not just yell out, but to actually focus on it.
Mm. One thing that I did in class is really fun. I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced this. Like, mess with your kids a little bit, right? You know the answer is A. The kid's like, it's A. You'd be like, you sure? And they're like, no, teacher, B. Right? They'll just change automatically. Not even Y, right? They'll just change automatically. And like, are you sure? And like, no, it's C. D? You know what I mean? They're just kind of like, oh, they get these body language symbols or signals from us. Just kind of mess with them, make it fun, right? Make it interesting for them. So they're like, oh, I really got to know why it's this one, right? Teacher's always going to try and mess with me, right? So I got to be able to say, teacher, it's A because of this. I don't care what you say, right? Make it interesting for them. Okay, the know-it-all student. These are typically your elementary kids that have just come back from the States or studying abroad. Everyone's had a lot of those, right? They literally can't contain their answers, how much knowledge they seem to have, right? They're just like this, all of class for 3 hours, like leaning over their desk, saying, teacher, 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 me, right? What do you do with those students? What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was repeating the smart ass comment earlier.
You just got to show them, I really like that you're trying to answer, you're doing such a great job, but we need to have Billy answer now. Thanks, keep up your...
Right, exactly. You want to acknowledge them, but you don't want to let them dominate the classroom. Yeah.
I know you can do this all the time, but I know in my memory classes when someone answers a question first, and I really want to call on someone else because this person's just like, all right, just whisper it in my ear. And I'm like, yeah, you got that right. And then I don't like, and then so no one else hears, so they can still try and find the answer themselves.
Right.
But sometimes I like them to keep it to themselves. And I can still reward them by saying, yeah, you got that right, but shh.
No. Anyone else use any other approaches?
Yeah, sometimes I try to randomize it. Like I have like a deck of cards, and each one of the students is like one of the cards on there. So just to get them out of their world, one student, I'll like shuffle the cards, show them, and kind of expect an answer.
Right. So that way they know that, this student, whoever gets this, it's a predetermined outcome. They're going to answer the question, right? Not me. Right. That's a good idea as well. So those know-it-all students, they can be challenging in terms of like getting other students involved. But honestly, I would love to have a classroom full of those kids, right? Because then the class literally just runs itself. You ask one question, bounce it off to one student, next thing you know, for 3 hours, you're just kind of like sitting there watching and laughing, right? They can take care of everything. But it becomes problematic when you mix them in with other groups of students. Right? Yeah, the apathetic one, right? We kind of touched on this type of student as well. So say you've got this is an extreme, but say you've got a class that's half-half. Half know-it-all, half apathetic. What tactics would you take in the classroom?
Team them up.
Team them up, okay? That's definitely a good idea, right? Because hopefully that makes the apathetic one maybe not necessarily feel guilty, but motivates them to actually be a little bit more than apathetic. What else?
Well, depending on where we are in like the lesson of my equal class, I've got 4 elementary kids in there, and the rest of them are middle school. So elementary answer everything, in middle school kids are like, okay.
Yeah.
So I was like if it's like an exercise of, okay, you have number 1, you have number 2, you have number 3, you have number 4.
Right.
And I'll give them like 5 minutes to do it, and then okay, answers.
Yeah. Just make equal
Yeah.
responsibility upon each student. Right. Yes.
Obviously, like changing like what type of question you're going to be asking the students. So ask the easier questions is the ones that don't know as much. And also, I mean, we already know this, but like cold calling, you just say their name first, then the other person can't raise their hand, right? So, and then you know which one's apathetic, so you can like make it like a yes or no or more of like a multiple choice one.
Right.
The other kids are more open-ended.
Definitely. That definitely works because you have to adjust it to that particular student. Right? You're not asking a general question to the class. You're saying, I'm going to take this very closed-ended question, ask it to this specific student because of his personality. Right. Yes?
I kind of have a class like this where there's half know-it-alls and half apathetic kids, and the
Is it
know-it-alls.
elementary and middle school, or all elementary and all middle school?
They're elementary.
All elementary.
Elementary, but
Mm.
the know-it-alls will call out even if I've already called someone else. So I'll call them by your name is that your name today or
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
But then the ones that are apathetic take at least 30 seconds to answer,
Right.
but it's the easier question, like you said, so they get it right, and they make a huge deal out of it.
Yeah.
So then when I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And then the ones that are know-it-alls, I'm like, good.
Yeah.
Like kind of like playing down their like
Right.
know-it-all, and then like bringing them up when they get it right, and then that evens it out because the apathetic ones want to like try more
Yeah,
than.
definitely. That sounds like a really good strategy. Yeah.
It takes a lot of patience because
Yeah.
they do take a long time.
I mean, to be honest, we've all had those classes before where you literally just are like, where it's kind of that extreme where it's divided. You just don't even feel like dealing with the apathetic students, so you just let the know-it-alls do everything. You know what I mean? Everybody, I think most people have experienced that, right? We want to kind of avoid that as much as possible, obviously, because that's only going to decrease their likelihood of reading and participating and doing their homework and all that stuff. It just makes it worse in the long run, right? It obviously is more work initially, starting out, but hopefully it can improve. So by the end of it, more of your students, at least those apathetic ones, are at least kind of in the middle, right? They're probably never going to be know-it-alls, but they're at least in the middle. They'll participate. They'll be, okay, teacher, that's fine. You called on me. I'll give you whatever answer, right, you're looking for. Okay. All right. So these are some basic solutions. Deeper understanding, like talking with the students, right? If they seem apathetic, why? Right? This is extremely important with like middle school students. Right? I do not envy the life of a Korean middle school student. They have no time for anything except for studying. That is their life, right? And that's one thing you can talk to them about. You know, what do you have going on right now? Is it middle school exam period, or you know, how many hagwons are you going to each week? How many hours do you get of sleep, right? Try and like let them know that you are compassionate and you are sympathetic to their plight per se, right? That you understand that it's not easy for them, especially to get through this kind of material. Right? Devil's advocate. Obviously, this is just playing the opposite role, right? For the students, multi-collateral faceted discussion, same thing. Relevant connection, kind of same thing. Okay. Moving on. Close reading. Inquisitive learning. Why do you think we use inquisitive learning for close reading? This is the story review, story analysis, story appreciation.
They have to read like tactics if they want to find out the deeper meaning of the novel.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So the students hopefully have already read, right, the assigned pages. Okay? So they're like, teacher, why are we talking about this for 3 hours? I already read it. Right? But hopefully we can provide them with something much, much more than just surface comprehension, which is what majority of them are getting when they're reading. right? If that, right? Just that very superficial level comprehension of what happened in the story, right? We're trying to show them that there's a lot more in literature than just, oh, point A, point B, point C, right? Trying to give them more to create that appreciation for literature, right? Make them want to read, find things that are maybe hidden to others, right? Rationale, GTI analysis, again, everything is connected back to the GTI theme for that day. Okay, methodology, story review, story application, story analysis. So story review is pretty straightforward. It's really just like, there's like some questions, basic questions asking, oh, what happened to this character when he did this, right? There's like a couple of those, and then there's like all the major plot points from it, and they just have to put it in order, right, that it happened. Pretty straightforward, okay? But the story, oh sorry, that's a mistake. It's story appreciation, not story application. Story appreciation is when they actually have the excerpts and discuss it, right? This is, again, the name itself, first that's a typo, but the name itself is appreciation. So this is where we really want to develop the appreciation. Because they already read that excerpt, those 3 or 4 excerpts in the novel. They already read that. But we're trying to show them there's something much more than what they probably initially read, right? We chose those specifically because they do make you think about something in a different way or a different perspective, right? And story analysis is where they learn about the literary device. They see examples of it from the story, and they complete an exercise, right? Trying to make those connections. Now, hopefully what the story analysis does, ideally it should give students a tool to use when they're reading. Meaning they're learning about what symbolism is, and they're doing some exercises to make sure that they actually understand and can apply it. So next time when they go home to do their homework reading, they can recognize it. They come in the next class and be like, oh, when this happened, this was a symbol for this or whatever, right? So hopefully they're just adding tools to the resource bank as they go through reading. They begin to slowly get more and more out of literature, right? Any questions about close reading? Okay, let's go on. Student management. I think I've pretty much touched all of this. One thing that will be important is I want to talk about open communication lines and then the curative ones. Because the nature of the workshop, again, that's why they were called intensives, right? They're just squeezed in there. You're seeing these kids for 9 hours in a week, right? Which typically they only see their teacher for 6 or 3 hours per week. It's very important that you always are welcoming in the classroom, not intimidating, especially for this type of program, right? Intimidating your students is only going to make it worse, right? Especially in the beginning, right? Whereas CL, it's very different. They always say, first few weeks, you should kind of be a little more authoritarian just to kind of establish the way your classroom runs. Because if you're more laid back in the beginning, it can get out of control by week 13, right? This is slightly different. Not that you just want to be like, hey guys, what's up? I'm sleepy too. You know what I mean? But you do want to have them feel comfortable enough to where they can talk to you, right? They come into class, even though they're tired, they're like, hey teacher, I see you're sleepy too, me too, that kind of thing. Make sure that you're welcoming, especially in the very beginning, okay? So let's talk about the curative, those 2 curative things there. Supplementary material. If you feel like your class is dead, and the same goes for CL as well. I'm sure some of you probably have done this in your classes. If you feel like your class is dead, they're going nowhere, they're just having a terrible day, right? Take a break from the material. Take a few minutes off, right? Just talk with them or watch a funny YouTube clip or something, right? Do something to get them a little more energetic or lively or involved in the class, right? Now, of course, that's not like licensed to go out and just, oh, we're just going to watch Finding Nemo today because my kids are sleepy, right? But I'm just saying, like, if there's a lull in the class, recognize it, address it with something outside of the content, and then go back into the content, right? And student assistance. We did get feedback from instructors, and this was something that they felt like they didn't know how to do. Meaning they would have these elementary students who were doing, like, say, Par Birdie or Eagle Level class, and they just literally would read carefully, but they just couldn't understand what was happening. because of the colloquial language, right? And we did make the expressions handouts, and hopefully that helps. But also be open. Like you may have kids that come up to you at the end of class, they're like, or at the beginning of class, they're like, teacher, I read, but I don't understand, right? Be open to help them. Like, okay, show me some areas that you struggled with, and I'll make sure that we focus on those in class, right? Or were there particular phrases that you got stuck on that weren't in the expressions handout, right? This is all basic teaching stuff that you guys probably all do in your classrooms anyways, right? But it's just even that much more important for this program, okay? Because it is workshop, they're on vacation, all this kind of stuff. Okay, another thing, this was a good thing that someone brought up during a previous feedback session, is during like the story review section, because it's relatively early in the class, as you're going through, just make an outline on the board of the points and leave it up there. Because they may have read part of it or some of it or whatever, or not read any of it, but if that outline of what happened is up there, they can constantly refer to it. And you can use it as a tool as well, refer back to it, right? You've got an outline on the plot, so as you're going through the next exercise, you're going to touch back, oh, remember, after this happened, what happened? Oh, this, okay, good, right? Just, that's a nice tool for you to have in the classroom. And then, this is kind of a given, but interaction, right? It's almost all these exercises are very discussion-based, right? So get them talking to each other often and early, okay? All right, GTP, experiential learning. What do you guys think that means?
Putting the student in a situation similar to one of the characters in the book.
Exactly, right? Don't just read about it, do it, right? That's what GTP is, right? We're taking whatever happened, whatever the theme is, and trying to apply that, have the students get into groups, and do it, okay? Okay, so they get a little bit of background information about the situation, break up into groups, work on it, present. Sometimes they may have debate in there as well, right? Now debate, it's not like master level debate or even debate workshop level debate, but it is just more forum type debate, you know what I mean, open. Like we don't have roles and time limits and things like that in any of the debates. It's more just, you know what, this is my idea, I'm going to defend it, and these other people have to defend this other idea, right? So let's go into the difference here. CTP versus GTP. Let's see. Raise your hand if you always use the CTP that's given in the workbooks for CL. Raise your hand if you never use the CTP that's given in the workbooks. Raise your hand if you mix it up. Okay? Now, how many of you would say that you probably change the CTP more often than using the CTP? Okay, so I think everyone here probably understands the limitations of the CTP, right? It's very cookie cutter, right? They're given this prompt. Every group is given the same prompt. They get up there and they give their presentations. It's like watching 3 of the same groups, right? They just do the same thing, right? That was one of the things we really want to avoid with the GTP, okay? So instead, we give them one overarching issue or situation, and then we break it up. Each group actually gets a different task or role within that situation, okay? They're not playing the same people, right? They're looking at it from a very different perspective. So say, for example, one of the examples that we use is actually from Track A, but one of the lessons is about endangered species, right? It's a subcomponent of global citizenship, protecting the environment, all that kind of stuff. So what we did was for the task or roles, each student is assigned a different animal that has a different threat. And they have to come up with a campaign, right? They're actually interns for PETA. And they have to come up with a campaign to protect this animal from this particular threat. So say there was like, we try to make them all relevant to Korea. So one of them is like the half-moon bear. You guys know that one? Right? It's the half-moon bear and lives in Korea. So it's actually hunted and killed because they use its bones in traditional Oriental medicine. Right? Another one was fur seal, which fur seals don't actually live in Korea, but they do live in North Korea. Close enough, right? Whatever. So they're obviously hunted and killed for their fur, right? And another one was, I forget which whale it was. It was a whale, some sort of whale, right? can't remember the exact species. But anyways, it was hunted and killed for consumption. You can actually get it at the fish market here in Seoul, right? And same in Busan and things like that. So they have a very different issue that they're trying to deal with, right? So each team just gets that one. There's specific student handouts on FTP, and that student handout has their role on it, and you give it to each group, right? There's only 3 roles, right, for each project. So you do have to kind of work with that limitation. We can't make unlimited roles, so you can, like, if you've got a big class, right, you may have to work with bigger, 2 teams may have to have the same role, or get creative with how you divide it up. You can also make your own role, add another animal, whatever, right? But the idea is that they all have a different perspective, and that when they're presenting, it not necessarily comes together to be a solution, but they see how they're all interconnected, right? Because obviously something like solving endangered species, you know, whatever, 5th grade students spending 30 minutes of sitting around talking about it, creating presentations, is not going to solve that problem, right? What they see is they take different pieces of it and address those issues, right? It's much larger than just solve global warming, you know what I mean? A lot of those CPPs are kind of that way, right? So we want to make it much more, I guess, specific for the students. And hopefully it's interesting come presentation time, because then they get to watch a group that did something completely different than them, right? They're not watching, oh, that's what we did. The same thing. Teacher, they stole our idea. No, you're not going to have any of that because they all have different tasks or roles. Okay? Now, one thing I will advise you about the GTP, some of them are complicated. Right? There was one from track A, and I believe it was like one of the first lessons. It does require a lot of preparation. There was one where each group is from a different planet, and they're different species. And that planet has different resources available, right? And each species has different cultural norms. So like some of them, like it would be like, oh, this species has this resource on their planet, and they only speak to men. They will not answer to a woman. Or their greeting was this, right? You have to like bend down and touch the floor in order to say hello or something like that, right? Something silly to get the students involved. And that's relatively complicated because then the students have to go around from group to group and try and collect whatever resources that they're lacking, right? So those kind of GTPs, if it's prepped properly, now based on the feedback we got, if it's prepped properly, kids love it. They absolutely love it. They think it's like one of the most interesting and fun activities they've ever done in Cheongdam. But if it's not prepped properly, I'm sure you guys can imagine, it's a nightmare. Right? Your kids are like, what? Huh? What? They're all over the place, running around, right? All your students are running around at the same time. Nobody knows who's from what planet, what species they are, all that kind of stuff. Right? So those kind of, that's where prep comes in, right? Knowing, oh, this is going to be one of those where I really got to be ready because it's relatively complicated for the students. Okay? Any questions about GTP? Yeah.
How much emphasis are you actually placing on the wrap-up?
Wrap up, not that much.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah. Wrap up is there. It works much better with, much more effectively with some GTPs than others. Right?
Based on time or?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily based on time, but based on the actual project itself. Because some of the projects do come together nicely because of the tasks or roles.
And everybody understands what's...
Right, everybody's on the same page, all that kind of thing. But sometimes it's not really, right? I think it's, what, 5 minutes? Roughly 5 minutes allotted in the structure for that, so it's not that crucial. Yes?
What would you suggest for a class of 5?
For a class of 5? So for GTP, you can do a few different things. Like, you can literally just do 2 on 3, or you can do like 2 on 3 versus you. You can be the third role, or, I mean, mix and match it, whatever. I mean, smaller classes, I think, can be much more enjoyable, right? Again, none of this stuff is rigid, right? Whatever you think is going to work for your class, make it work. Okay? Any other questions about GTP? Okay. So a lot of this goes in the same thing that you deal with CTP, right? None of these issues are really, that separate from CTP. So you break up into groups, and one team member is literally doing all the work, right? The others are just kind of hanging out, waiting for that student to finish. Okay, what do you guys do in that type of situation?
Make a team leader.
Make a team leader. Is that what you said? What does that team leader do? What's their role?
Like they have to designate roles for everyone. Like,
Right. Delegate the
you're
work.
the team leader, you listen to them. Like if they ask you to draw something, draw it.
I do team leader too, but I make it like I call it class president, and they're all keen to be class president until I tell them if their team does poorly, their score is like 1 letter point lower than everyone else.
Because they're the leader.
Because they're the leader.
It's like,
and
what's
they're
it
like,
like,
oh,
yeah,
and then they're do it, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Okay, so give responsibility to that one student, more responsibility. What other strategies have you guys used during CTP? Yes.
Like if it's like a really like a problem student who's not doing any work, then like I usually like not threaten, but I would say that I'm going to take you out of your group and you have to be in my group.
Right.
So then just sit alone with me at a table,
Definitely.
and then I have to probe them for all the answers.
Isolation. I've definitely done that in the past several times where you take that one student and literally just move them to the front. You're like, you and me, buddy. What do you want? I mean, we can do this every day. You and me for 30 minutes working on this project. Or you can work with your peers. It's typically, that's what they would prefer. Right? Working one-on-one with you for 30 minutes. GTP, another thing is, you'll see it in the class structure. We did try to, because we know some of them are much more complicated, because you are having different roles, right? It requires a lot more guidance from you. We did allow a lot more time for GTP than CTP. I think it's roughly about 55 minutes, the entire GTP. So you should have sufficient time to actually work with each group individually to make sure they're all on the right track. Right? Okay, off task, that can happen as well with your lower level students, or even your higher level students, but they're literally just off and nowhere. You have no idea what they're preparing, right? They're supposed to create a campaign to protect this endangered species. You go over and they're literally like, we're going to make a video game where you go around and you club baby seals, because we think if students enjoy clubbing baby seals, they'll be more aware of seals, or something like that, right? Where they're just completely random. It doesn't really address the issue or task that they were assigned to. So what would you do in that type of situation? Or what have you done in that type of situation? That not really happen?
Most times they're like, and how does that answer the question? And like,
Yeah.
and I was like, it doesn't. Start over from the beginning. Like,
Yeah. I mean, the big thing is that's going to be where your dual role comes in, right? Where you're kind of playing a team member, but you're also making sure that you're going around and you're maintaining class control as well. But when you become that team member, that's when you can really contribute to make sure they're on track, right? Not off in spaces.
I give them like small time limits. Like, okay, I'm going to get up and look at you guys in about 5 minutes, and I need to see where you're at. And then as the time winds down, I tell them when they're at about 2 minutes. And usually for 3 minutes, they don't do anything. And then the last 2 minutes, they're like, oh. And then I have something that I can look at, and then I just keep doing that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the way the GTP is structured as well. There's, the 4 components of it. I can't remember what exactly, it says in the program guide anyways. But make the time limit announcements. Be like, okay, 5 minutes, and then you can start going around with the groups. So everyone's kind of aware, and then just kind of keep your eye on it. Say 2 minutes left as you're going around. Make sure everyone's working on it. Pretty much it's the same as CTP, so I think everyone here is pretty familiar with it. Any other questions about GTP? Okay. So, the way it works is, this is where it's going to get a little tricky, a little hairy here. So class 6, the students have already completed the reading when they come into class 6, right? So guided reading isn't necessary. So instead what they're going to do is complete a book report, which that's what they did online during the regular semester, right? So there's 2 book reports because there are 2 books, okay? But obviously a book report is going to take longer than 30 minutes, right? So during class 6, what you're going to do is you'll have the handouts on FTP. It just guides students through the handouts to get them started on it. And then they complete the rest as homework, right? And they are level specific. There's actually 3 variations of the book reports. There's the level 1 book report, which is for level 1 and level 2. There's the next book report, which is level 3 only. And then the most difficult book report is level 4 and 5. And they just do, it's different levels of analysis that they're doing, right? The lower level is very simple, right? Very basic. The higher level, they're doing a little bit more complex analysis. They actually write an essay at the end of it, things like that, right? But again, it's not like, it's not a full-on like essay. It's just an abridged like, oh, they give it a simple prompt of whatever, this happened to this character, you know, what do you think about this, right? Relatively simple. You know, they don't have to write like a 4-page essay or anything like that. Just a few hundred words, good, right? And you guys decide, because there's not actually a grade assigned for this either, but you know, bring it in the next day. You should try and at least write a comment, right? There's not a grade or anything assigned to it, but please, it's highly recommended. I know for some of the other programs, obviously they do offer compensation for essay grading, but there's no grading involved with the book reports. We just suggest or ask that you at least write a comment, right? Does anyone know, are your locations using the portfolio? Is anyone aware of the portfolio? There's something called a portfolio. You know about it? It's basically just a folder. It says Cheongdam on it. And it's offered for several of the different programs. And it's got the like clear, empty sheets in it where students can input their work. This is for the parents, primarily. Because the parents are like, wow, I'm paying a lot of money for my kid to come here for 1 month. What are they doing? I have no idea what my students are doing. But by using that portfolio, they actually have a tangible output at the end, right? So there's like 2 book reports, and there's also something we'll talk about in a minute called statement of purpose, right? That can go in there, these 2 written things. And with the book reports, it is nice to see at least a comment from your instructor, right? The parents can be like, okay, my child wrote all this stuff, but the instructor didn't even look at it, like, what's the point? They could have wrote all this stuff at home, right? Why do I have to pay money for them to come in and write this stuff, right? So at least give them a little bit of feedback, comment on the book reports, okay? So then that's class 6 for book report 1. Class 12, if you look in your structure, you're going to spend doing multi-sensory presentation prep. Because during class 13, the students are each going to present a multi-sensory presentation, right? Patrick, can you tell me a little bit about the multi-sensory presentation? You actually taught them, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be able to do almost anything they want with it, like bring an instrument or whatever, but they're pretty small classes, just 3 kids, and so basically we just do PPTs.
Yeah, that is definitely the most common.
And they have gotten better at it just by giving them little tips like don't read the slides, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's okay.
Do they enjoy it?
I think they enjoy the days when I do one, but when they do, there's a kind of
Right. That's one thing you're not going to get the best quality from your students in terms of presentations because they're not getting that much guidance, right? And that's done intentionally. We want it to be open-ended. We don't want to limit the students. We feel like everything else in all the Cheongdam programs are just very restrictive, right? You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Multi-sensory presentation is very open. Meaning, here's the GTI topic. You have to give a presentation on it. That's it. Go. Right? Let them have it. Let them run with it. Right? Obviously, if they're younger students, they have no idea, you should give them more guidance. Right? But that's what we're doing on day 12. Spend that last 30 minutes preparing them for it. So what you should do is you should prepare one yourself. Right? That's the first thing, to show them an example. And then present it for them, and then tell them how to prepare. Right? Don't tell them what to prepare, but how to prepare. So say the GTI is global citizenship, right? This is just off the top of my head. A student could literally come in and bring like a small bag full of garbage and be like, this is my presentation on global citizenship, and pull it out one by one. This is a gum wrapper that I picked up walking to Cheongdam. This is a bottle can that I picked up when I went home from school yesterday, right? Something like that. And they're telling you about how they're being a good global citizen by picking up garbage, right, from the streets. Or something like this, completely open-ended, what the students want to do, right? Like the musical instrument, if it's on creativity, a student can come in and play their violin for you, or something like that. They're not limited on what they can do, right? So you want to stress that, be creative with your presentations, but you will have those students, especially younger students, who, if you don't give them guidance, they literally just won't do anything, right? So you kind of have to make sure that they're ready and they know kind of what direction they could go during that day, okay? Now, majority of them probably will end up being like PPT presentations, but that's perfectly fine, right? But the more you kind of encourage creativity, the more likely you are to see it on the day of, okay? Okay, so that's learning through teaching, right? Multi-sensory presentation. Pretty straightforward because they're literally teaching you or the entire class about that trait for the day, right? Let's see. So after each student presents, you should try to have at least a brief discussion, right, about it. Now, I did speak with some instructors that taught it, and they were like, man, my students prepared, and it wasn't even close to what the topic was, right? Especially those Mega Giga students. They're like trying to think about like, what is it, interpersonal relationships or interpersonal competency, and they'll come in and be like, my brother beats me up every day. Well, just like something random that has nothing to do with the actual topic. So that's where that 30 minutes of week 12 comes in, or class 12 comes in hand. Make sure they all understand, right? And you actually let them try and see if they can choose, right? Because you've got a list of these 7 traits, and then you cover a lot of them as well, right, in the class, the subcomponents. So it'll be like, who wants to do this one? Let them volunteer, right? And if everyone wants to do the same one, that's your choice. You can be like, yeah, that's great, okay? But it might be better for have a little more variation, right? Be like, okay, I want this group of students to do this group of students to do this, if you have to assign it out to individuals, right? Any questions about multi-sensory presentation? Okay, so the basic structure of Class 13, at least the way it's set up right now, is you're going to start off, I believe, with book report 2. You're going to go through those handouts and actually do it all in class, the book report, allotting a full hour for that, right? Which, again, because the writing is not that comprehensive, it shouldn't take more than an hour for any of the students to complete those. Okay? Then you follow it up with the multi-sensory presentations, where the students actually present other presentations, and at the end, statement of purpose. Has anyone here ever written a statement of purpose? Yep. What did you write it for?
Job interviews.
Job interviews, okay? Anyone else? Emerson? Was it for job interviews?
Jobs, yeah.
Yeah. Typically, what we found, statement of purpose is usually used for some sort of higher education. Graduate schools, most graduate schools, graduate programs and PhD programs require a statement of purpose with your admissions. What do you think about our students writing a statement of purpose? The basic structure of a statement of purpose is like, this is my goal, this is what I've done in order to reach that goal, and this is what I plan on doing in the future in order to reach that goal. So what do you think about our students doing that type of writing?
They're not sure of their goals just yet.
Yeah. I would say most of us aren't sure of our goals yet. Most of us probably can't write a statement of purpose, right? I mean, let's just be real. The students, they have no idea, right? They may say, oh, I want to be a doctor. Why? My dad's a doctor. My mom's a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. I want to be a doctor, right? But that's not a real justification for why they want to be a doctor, right? So it is relatively scaled down in difficulty level. So hopefully that we can just kind of make connections for the students, right? And there's going to be exercises that they do, like it's all connecting to the GTI traits, right? Oh, this is my dream job. This is why I want it. These are the GTI traits that I think you need in order to be good at this job, and this is why I think you need those traits. And this is what I learned from these books about these GTI traits that are going to help me do this job or reach this dream or goal, right? Again, it's very simplistic in the nature. A lot of it is just like checking boxes and stuff like that. So don't get too ambitious with it, right? The students, we know, they can't really write a statement of purpose. To be honest, I don't think I could write a statement of purpose. So we'll just let them kind of make a few connections here and there, and if they can get a couple connections, great. Job well done, right? Okay. So one thing on day of, students may not have prepared a presentation, right? You prep them for it during class 12. But then you come in, you've got 2 students out of 12 that have a presentation. So what do you think you should do? You got a whole hour. So what did you do in that situation?
Help them put one together.
Put one together. Make one together as a class, sure. Right? A big thing is going to be prep on your end. Obviously, you should have a sample that you use during class 12, but make another one for class 13 as well. or have an idea on how you can make one together. Because you will see it. Students will come in with no presentation. Has anyone here ever taught the Chongqing program? Yeah? Did you ever teach the, it was, I think, interview and debate class where students had to prepare presentations at the beginning of each class about newspaper articles? Well, those kind of things can be very problematic. Of course, with that particular group of students, they're very high achievers, so it wasn't as problematic, but for this program, it's going to be much more. To be honest, if 60 or 70% of your students actually prepare a presentation, you're doing pretty well, right? Of course, that depends. If you got a class full of third grade Eagle students, I would expect 100% completion. But lower levels, they're going to struggle with it, and lower proficiencies are going to struggle with it as well. Okay, so I think Patrick, you've already seen this. But anyways, I'm actually going to give a quick multi-sensory presentation that I prepared myself to give you an example, okay, of what you can do with your students. Okay? Give me just a second here. Okay, so this is taken from the GTI trait about self-leadership, right? So I started, when I was preparing this presentation, I started thinking about, what is self-leadership to me? What does that mean? I mean, leadership is pretty straightforward, right? The ability to lead, right? What is self-leadership? The ability to lead yourself. Well, how do you lead yourself, right? And then I started thinking about reflecting on my own personal life, right? When are times that I feel like I've led myself and didn't follow others or follow the path that was laid out before me, right? So let me just go back a little bit. So I went to a very small college. I'm actually an adoptee. I went to a very small college in Kentucky. I kind of grew up in Kansas City and Kentucky. I was like the only Asian ever, like in both places, right? So it was always kind of like this weird, like, am I white? Am I Asian? What exactly am I? My parents are white. I also had adopted siblings as well. So I was always in kind of this ambiguous place of what am I? Where am I? You know what I mean? Don't really fit in with one particular group or the other. So I just kind of followed whatever was given to me at that point because I was never sure of who I was, right? So I went to a small school. I majored in business, got out of school, got a job. Next thing I know, I got a house, right? Nothing fancy, just whatever, very small 2-bedroom house. But I had a house because that was, what my parents told me. Like, major in business, so you can get a job. You get a job, so you can get a house. Okay? Check, check. I got a job, I got a house. Okay? So the next step is, I got a car. Okay? So now I got a house and a car. But I also got these payments I got to make as well. So I got to keep my job. Right? So it's building. I'm like, okay, this is what my dad taught me. Right? You study, get a house, get a car. Right? And at this point, I was relatively young, right? Enjoyed, hanging out, partying, all that kind of good stuff. So of course, a few ladies were involved. It was a good time, right? I got a house, I got a car, I got a good job. Might as well have some fun with some ladies, right? Next thing I know, what's the next logical step for me?
Babies.
Yes, a family, get married, find that one special lady, make a baby, right? Get a bigger house, get a more expensive car, all that stuff, right? Suddenly I realized, when I was in the middle of all this, it wasn't necessarily suddenly, but it was over an extended period of time, I realized I was miserable. I was a sad sack of a human being. All I did was work, worry about paying my mortgage, worry about making my car payments, worry about maintenance, insurance, all these things. So what I do? I got rid of it all. Sold everything I had, right? Didn't become a beggar, but pretty close to it. I actually went to India. Left America, went to India, didn't have a job in India, didn't have anything set up, just went. And planned on living there for a year. Just to do it. Why not, right? I was miserable, I needed to change, why not make a big one, right? I went to India. Went there, kind of explored around, actually found 2 schools in India and started volunteer teaching there, right? This was all purely with the money I made from the house and the car and all those things, selling everything, right? So I'm just kind of hanging out. I lived in a hostel, would teach with these little kids, in the school, no desks, no paper, no pencils, nothing. Just a chalkboard at the front and a bunch of kids on the floor, right? In rural India, a village of about 1,400 people, right? And I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is like, I'm like, this nut and crunchy hippie that's doing all these crazy things, right? Who thinks they're going to go teach in a rural village in India out of nowhere, right? So it was more like out of the idea of it that I was doing it. But somewhere along the way, when I was there, I realized, you know what? This is great. I'm loving this, right? I'm loving traveling, seeing all these different things that I've never seen, exposing myself to all these amazing cultures that I've never experienced, that I would never experience in Kentucky, of all places. Kentucky's almost as homogenous as Korea, right? You've got rednecks and rednecks, and that's pretty much it. Sorry if anyone else is from Kentucky, but that's pretty much how it is. And being an Asian there doesn't really help the situation, right? You kind of look at it, everybody's like, do you speak English? Yes, actually I do. So you experience all these things, and I was like, this is great. But it wasn't just the traveling. It was the kids, right? Granted, very limited. I mean, we're talking about kids that can say hello, and that's it. I wasn't given a book, a curriculum, anything. Just given a chalkboard at the front of the classroom and 15 like second graders in front of me, right? But somewhere along the way, I was like, this is very rewarding. This trumps a house and a car and a wife and a kid any day of the week, at least at that point in my life, right? So bringing it back to the idea of self-leadership, right? One of the big things that I realized, most important for self-leadership, you have to know who you are and what you want, right? Otherwise, how are you going to lead yourself? But then, next step, you have to know where you want to go and what it takes to get there. Okay? But not just knowing that stuff. You have to take action on it, right? I'm here. I know where I want to be, and I know what it takes to get there. But then you have to do it. All those little things that it takes, right? Buying a plane ticket, selling your house, whatever it is, right? Doing all the little things that it takes to get where you want to go. Because it should and probably will change along the way. But you still have to be able to do those little things. Otherwise, you'll never end up where you want to be. So basically, in conclusion, what I realized is that self-leadership is all about knowing who you are. Because once you know who you are, everything else should be easy from there. And then by doing that, you can end up where you want to go. That's it. Thanks, guys. So obviously, that's not a kind of presentation you would use with Memory Mega and give you little students. But you should try and make it personal. Meaning that's what I did. I tried to make it personal because no one wants to hear just some random bland thing, right? They want to know about you. You're their teacher. You're spending 9 hours a week with them. Let them know about you, and then hopefully they'll return the favor and do their presentations about themselves, right? That's pretty much it in terms of class structure and things like that. But does anyone have any questions about the program? Additional questions or concerns? Issues they think they might face in the classroom? Yes?
Wait, this is commenting. Did you sell your wife and child?
No, I actually never got one. It was somewhere in the middle.
You probably would have a lot of money.
Yeah. Buy one yourself. Hawaii.
But Korean American babies are very expensive.
Korean American babies?
Very expensive. I know.
eBay, right? Okay, so that's pretty much it, guys. If you have any questions, I'll be up here. Any issues or whatever, thanks for coming. If you could, make sure you get your name on